Are you being manipulated? Jonathan Graves, an independent researcher exploring human behavior and influence, presents The Puppet Master's Playbook, revealing the hidden psychology behind manipulation and covert influence used by con artists, politicians, cult leaders, and intelligence agencies. Learn about the 4 laws of covert manipulation, planting ideas in someone's mind, and social engineering. But most importantly, learn how to defend yourself against them. And to do just that, the Puppet Master's Playbook also includes a 7-day influence experiment, so you can see these principles in action. Are you ready to take charge? Get your copy of the Puppet Master's Playbook on Amazon.com today.
I think a lot of people feel that PR and press releases is something that is only for people, large companies, well-funded. You have to be established. And the fact of it is being unknown, being new, being just a startup or a solo business is not an obstacle to getting PR. It's actually easier for people who are in that stage of their business.
Top leaders, meaningful conversation, actionable advice. Bulldoze complacency. Ignite inspiration. Create impact. Produced by Southwestern family of companies. This is the Action Catalyst.
Are you interested in advertising with the Action Catalyst? Our listeners could be hearing about your brand right here, right now. For details, shoot us an email at info@theactioncatalyst.com.
Do you ever wonder why some businesses get featured in the media and others get ignored? Maybe yours gets ignored? Today's guest, Mickie Kennedy, has spent over 25 years addressing that question exactly. As a PR expert and the founder of eReleases, a leading press release distribution service, Mickie has helped thousands of businesses stand out, establish credibility, and grow. So, Mickie, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
A lot of our listeners are solopreneurs, small business owners, that kind of thing. First of all, let's just start by maybe dispelling a myth that PR, press releases, things like this aren't just for the big boys.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people feel that PR and press releases is something that is only for people, large companies, well-funded. You have to be established. And the fact of it is that journalists get the most shares and engagement on articles they write about when the audience doesn't know about it. Covering a well-known company in your industry, most people know about it. But if you have a new discovery, new tool, new service, journalists get they see the most engagement, the most shares, the most people looking at the article. And for that reason, being unknown, being new, being a really, just a startup or a solo business is not an obstacle to getting PR. It's actually easier for people who are in that stage of their business. So don't discount the fact that you feel it's a little premature to get started with PR and press releases.
What is the difference between PR and advertising?
Right. So PR is sending out press releases to the media. For PR firms, it might also include pitches over the phone as well as email pitches. Advertising is, taking, an ad and putting it in front of people. A lot of people are familiar with, ads that they see on blogs and certain websites, but there's also ads on social media. There's ads on YouTube. But a lot of our blinders come up when it comes to advertising. Content, when someone chooses to write about you like a journalist, that's seen as a big credibility indicator. There's social proof. This, you've been chosen to be written about, and it creates the signal of trust. And for that reason, they know the language isn't your language, it's the journalist writing about it. So if they're excited and talking about how great you are, they trust that, where they wouldn't trust it if you were saying it in an ad. And when people are in that mode, they are behind you. They're not looking to now see if they can find a cheaper option on Amazon, or is there something that could work, maybe just as much. Price shopping doesn't really participate in that sort of conversion, where with advertising, it does.
What is a press release really? Because it used to be pretty cut and dry, but now in the digital age, what parts of it are essential? At its core, what must it be?
So generally, it's an announcement to the media. The rule of thumb going back to journalism is that it answers the who, what, when, where, how, and why of what you're announcing. And, if you're announcing that you're going to be speaking at an event, you want to make sure, that people know where it is and when it is and, all of those things. And so, take that into account. It doesn't have to be very long. It does have to have a headline. That's an area for you to position yourself appropriately. But the big mistake I see a lot of end users make with headlines is they write it for the consumer, and they'll, use some New York Post puns and stuff like that. But, this is not the headline that is going to be in an article written about you. Journalists write that, or their bosses, managing editors and people like that write the headlines. And so you're writing a headline to get the attention of the journalists, but more specifically, you want to communicate that this is appropriate to them, to their beat, their industry, who they cover. So rather than be clever, boring, detail-oriented headlines work the best. And so you want to communicate your most important aspect right there in the headline. It's often a good idea to mention your company name. Most journalists, their biggest complaint is their inbox is just filled with spam. I think that's why even when PR firms pitch via email, they often have to call and walk the journalist through how they can do a search to pull it up in their inbox, because it's really difficult. The biggest mistake people make is they write their press releases from their perspective of, this is important to us. And what you have to do is make it important to the journalist. The journalist is a gatekeeper. Their biggest asset is their audience, and they have to decide, is this content that's going to educate or entertain my client, my audience, or ideally both? And so, you have to sometimes reverse engineer your announcement to make sure you're incorporating material that's going to excite and really educate the audience. I think the most popular press release I get is a product launch press release, and it's usually, here's the product, here's a list of features. Sometimes it's just bullets, and then here's a page to learn more and buy. Now, a journalist, all journalists like to follow a story arc, and even if you read small articles, you'll notice they generally follow the story arc. It's near impossible to turn that type of product launch into a story arc. But what you could do is incorporate a use case study. Here was someone who beta tested it. This was their success. Ideally, if you have some numbers around it, that looks really good. And then get a quote by them. And all of a sudden, that's a little story that they can put and better position your product launch. And that makes a journalist probably 10 times more likely to cover your product launch. The one press release that I've never had fail by anybody I've ever coached is to do an industry survey. And so whatever industry you're in, survey other people out there and, get their perspective on things that are trending. What are things that people would want to know from other people in your industry? Are there things that are influencing it? So you can ask questions around that. I always tell people, what are the type of questions that you could not wait to ask other people in your industry at a trade show or conference? Often those could be the type of questions you should consider asking in such a survey. And I like to do 12 to 16 questions, 4 questions per page. And then you take that link, and we don't expect you to have a Rolodex of people in your industry, but there's lots of small and independent trade associations in every industry. Avoid the big one, the big one everyone knows, but do a little Google searches and look around, approach that association and say, hey, I'm doing this survey. I would love for you to send it out to your members. I'm looking for at least 100 responses for it to be statistically relevant. And in exchange for doing this, I will mention you in a press release I'll be issuing. You look at the results of the survey and pick one, at most 2 of the responses that you feel are going to be the biggest surprise for your industry, and then focus and make that the press release. And you're going to provide a little bit of analysis because you're the author of the survey, a quote by you as to why the numbers skewed that way. Everybody I've ever coached doing this has received at the very least 6 articles of 6 earned media articles appropriate to their industry. Sometimes 14 or more articles result from this. Build a resource page on your website where you put all the questions and answers, because a journalist might say, hey, this was interesting, but what other questions were asked? And maybe they find one question that is intriguing to them. That might be a good second press release. It works. It's a little bit of time involved, but it doesn't have to be very difficult. I have a client who did this for 7 years. They built that resource page for each of the surveys, and most of the trade publications and people that covered it online linked to that survey. And their SEO has been amazing because they were getting so many requests from journalists. They realized we are seen in this industry now as thought leaders. We get requested. There's a new merger in this one little vertical. They want to know what their perspective of that is and get a quote by them. And so they're getting media attention all the time. And how did they become thought leaders? They just claimed it by doing this survey annually. And they're still always in the media and always getting media attention.
So we know how to not be ignored and how to craft a winning press release. Is there an upper limit to how often we should be doing this?
I wouldn't do it for the sake of doing it. I feel like I tell small businesses, try to come up with a newsworthy idea at least quarterly. If you have natural milestones coming up, incorporate that into your timeline. Like you have a new rollout, or you're celebrating something that's important to the business, or you have a strategic hire like an executive or an industry veteran who's coming in as a salesperson. Personnel changes outside of that, don't bother to announce you have a new associate of HR. Now, I think that, you have to find what works for you. I think for most people new to PR, I think trying to do something every other month or at a minimum quarterly is something that people should try to strive for. The most important thing is that, you've picked something strategic and newsworthy to talk about. Another one is being a contrarian. If everybody in your industry is talking one way, so many people think that they should do a press release, joining the conversation, saying the same thing as everybody else. It used to be called newsjacking to try to get in there early. But it really rarely works now because so many people are trying it. But if you're the one person that says something that's different than everybody else in the industry, that's a time when you can really succeed and do well. Many times journalists go to print with everything being one-sided. And they rarely have anything negative about it because very few people raise their hand and said, hey, here's the contrarian viewpoint. But, you've raised your hand and said, here's the con side of things. So every time a journalist writes about the subject, you stand the likelihood they'll plug you in. If you can take a contrarian viewpoint that doesn't alienate you with your customer base or, create any stigma, that's a thing that works really well.
What is the 3% rule?
97% of press releases that get issued over the wire, they do not result in earned media. I scratch my head every time I see a product launch release, which is, here's the product, here's a list of features, and here's a link for more. I would say almost all of them are like that. And it really doesn't even satisfy what a journalist needs to write an article for. And so now you've given them the job of how do I find something interesting that I can incorporate with this product launch that would make it entertaining or interesting for my audience. You do the work, give them that use case study, give them quotes by someone who used it, put publicly available data points. Like you have a logistics software solution. Talk about the fact that 63% of new transportation companies fell in the first 5 years. That's probably a data point that exists in every industry. So get that, cite it. It shows the stakes of why is this important? Take that model and just try to be instructive. Think about the story arc. Think about what are the industry blind spots. What is it that your industry and trade publications aren't really reporting on and should? That's how you stand out, and that's how you take the 3% rule and you write releases that are only within that 3%, and all of a sudden your success rate is going to be maybe a third of the press releases that you do, maybe 2/3 of the press releases that you do will get pickup.
We had mentioned earlier that we have a lot of small business owners in the audience. Small often means local, and you had mentioned even local media, local publications that make a big impact. How can small businesses turn local press into big media wins?
Sure. So local media, I tell people, you don't have to write a press release. Local media is just introducing yourself, to the journalist. Here, email usually works. The exception is if you're in a huge city like New York or Chicago, the problem is in a lot of the bigger markets, they're dealing with that email spam from the databases. But fortunately, it's minimal, the amount of spam that local is getting. And so what you're going to do with them is do a pitch. It's going to be like, hey, I've seen a lot of people talking about recently, businesses going green. And as a local dry cleaner, I'd love to talk to you about our investments and what we're doing. We're not using any of these whatever chemicals. And here's some photos. Here's an amazing quote. And the reason I like to include a quote is because if a journalist is considering an idea and you have a really great quote, they can envision that that's like a right hook that's going to make that article stand out. And what do I mean by a great quote is you said something very succinctly, active verbs, very condensed, very powerful, that if they were to paraphrase that, it would be a loss. You'd be like, oh, you said it so much better, perfectly. Sometimes it can be, creative or snappy, but it doesn't have to be. You don't have to be a wordsmith or something like that. But just really make sure it's active verbs as condensed as possible. It's the one area where if you lean on AI, you may not get the best results. If your writing's not great, it's appropriate to lean on AI. But what you do is you go to it and say, hey, I'd like to do this press release on the contrarian viewpoint on this issue, which is really trending and hot in my industry. This is my position, maybe bullets of what I'm comfortable doing. I want to be rational and not seen as a crazy uncle, or someone who's just being a contrarian for the sake of being a contrarian. And I want to have an amazing quote. How would you structure this press release? And then AI will give you the structure and then say, okay, let's take it top down. Give me 10 headline options for this press release. Okay. If you're happy with one, pick that. If not, say, I like this one, but give me 3 variations of it. And then say, okay, now give me 3 opening paragraphs of this press release. Pay attention. Is all the who, what, when, where, how, and why sort of answered in that paragraph, or does it need to be? And then go, okay, now give me the second paragraph, and just go like that. Generally the second, third paragraph, I want to make sure there's a quote there. And that may be the area where you go back later and say, okay, that quote that you have here, give me 10 versions of it. I want it as strong, as condensed, make it sing, and give me 10 versions of it. But you might have to go in there and massage it a little. 1 sentence is best. 2 sentences are okay. Beyond that, you're talking too much. But when you're pitching these local journalists, include that amazing quote, because even if they feel like this is soft news, that quote is going to make them say, wow, I could really write an article there. And that quote is going to make it be like a smack on the page or online. And the reason I like including a couple of photos is a lot of people have gone online. And even your local papers, even if they're print only, generally have online as well. And they know that engagement is higher when there's a photo. And the great thing that's happened in the last 20 years of PR is the photos people engage with best are candids. Make sure you include a couple of images because that gives you a little bit of an edge as well. And just introduce yourself, say you're a local business, put your little pitch there, invite them to ask if they have any questions or anything like that. I like to do this at least quarterly. And if you look at it, in your local market, it's probably less than 10 people who would ever write about you. So target your local paper, find out who covers your industry, call or look online, see if you can get their email address. Other places in your community, business magazine or business newspaper, if you're lucky enough to have one, community papers, smaller little papers, sometimes these are free papers, but also don't discount the possibility of TV or radio. Is there something you could do that would be engaging on TV? Is there something about your business or something that, people would either want to come in and take a little video of you, or you go to the studio. So if you have a pitch around that, that could work well. Radio, are there local segments that sometimes spotlight businesses? It may be AM, FM, but pay attention and keep in mind describing how it's going to look for someone who's on TV. Describe how it's going to sound or what you're going to discuss that's going to be captivating over the radio. And going back to those weekly papers and little neighborhood papers and stuff like that, this is a place where people have done really well in certain segments that might be applicable to a column. The thing about these weekly neighborhood papers is they are focused 98% of their energy on selling ads. And then they go, oh no, we now have to put content in here. And so if you go to them and say, hey, I would like to do a monthly column, they're going to push back and say, we'd like you to do a weekly. Yeah, I think all of these things work really well. It's so doable. What I do find is people who are really good about pitching the local stuff get really good at then pitching nationally.
Little different type of question. Usually we think of a press release as a good thing. It's getting the word out about something that we're offering, something we did, something that's happened. It's a bit of a brag almost. But sometimes we have to put out a press release for a reason we might not want to. How can we be smart about crafting a press release in a damage control sort of setting?
I think the biggest thing is to get out there quick. You know, if a mistake is made, own it. There are a lot of people that don't want to say, we really screwed up here. They feel like, oh, you know, attorneys cringe at that and say, you're just admitting liability. Now, if it's a product and, you know, involves a recall, you're going to have parameters that you have to, what you can and can't say. But the thing is, get out there, communicate quickly. When it comes to a recall, that you've owned it, you provided all the information very quickly. You've put a resource page where people can find out more, easily find out if their product is affected. If you know, someone at the company has said something stupid, or you know, they've said something. I've found a lot of people doing this on social media. They've said something pro one political party, and now there's a backlash because their customer base turns out was 2/3 the other side of the party. And so, you know, get out there, own it quickly, and if you've offended a core part of your audience, apologize and say, I'm sorry that I've hurt your trust, and understand that, you know, these are the things that we do for anybody in our community. And, you know, I think that backpedaling and saying that's not really how I feel. No, you have to own what you said and just say, even though our political allegiance may not be aligned, I love my community. I love my customer base. I don't agree with everything on my party. And I feel that if we were to sit down and talk, there's a lot more that we agree on than we disagree on. And is there something that you can do that's measurable? Like, you know, for the rest of this year, 5% of all profits are going to go to something that is not the other side, but is something that's positive, you know, that's something that would help your community, something that your audience would recognize this is a good in our community. And so, you know, something like that. But, you don't want to pander to the other side. You don't want to say, oh, I was lying, you know, because then you're disingenuous, but you want to own it quickly. You want to acknowledge that you've failed them, because my grandmother's advice is there's no place for politics and business and, in social engagements and things like that. And I should have minded her business. Bring grandma into it. I was like, oh, he loves his grandmother. I soften a little bit towards him and things like that. So, you know, try to put some perspective in it. Be honest, own it quickly. If you're able to legally apologize, I think apologize, fall on the sword. Don't backtrack, but, because backtracking, people go, oh, the only reason he's backtracking now is because, he's losing his customers. You're like, this is how I feel. Make a donation or something like that. And that's a good way to sort of just like, okay, it's raw what you did, but you've immediately owned it. You've immediately apologized, and you're trying to be positive, and you have focused on several things that, you know, we recognize differences. We come to agreements, and maybe inject a little bit of humor in there as well, if it's appropriate.
Mickie, time is short, but I don't want to let you go without mentioning that you're also a highly accomplished poet with a new book out. Tell us, if you will, just briefly about your foray into poetry. Perhaps it's a long-standing one. You know, how that developed, and maybe about the new book, where people can get it.
Sure. So I actually graduated with an MFA in creative writing with an emphasis in poetry, I think around 30 years ago, over 30 years ago, actually. And then I transitioned into business because I was tired of waiting tables. And my first job was a startup where I learned how to write press releases, and that's where PR grew from that. But I took 20 some years off of poetry to focus on growing my business. And then I guess around 7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, I started reading more and starting to write. And I had prostate cancer. And so I agonized over a lot, and I turned to poetry and wrote about it. So my first book is Glandscapes, like a play on glands and landscapes. And if you're interested in learning more, my poetry website's mickiekennedy.com or glandscapes.com will take you directly to order the book online. And it's just about my journey, what it means to go through that. I found that there's a lot of people that don't talk about cancer, and specifically prostate cancer. And also, a lot of doctors don't communicate fully about what's going on and what to expect. So it was just sharing that. And it's done really well with having individual poems published in journals. And then that manuscript got picked up and won an award and is being published through Button Poetry.
That's fabulous. Well, Mickie, we wish you all the best. Thank you so much for the generosity of your time today and all the information you've given us. And we really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you for having me.
If you enjoy this podcast, please make sure to subscribe. And to stay updated on everything that the Action Catalyst is up to, make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Action Catalyst Podcast and on Twitter at Catalyst_Action. And thanks for listening.